Hi, guys. Welcome back to Collectively Unhinged, where I am being forced to start today's podcast because Courtney just cursed at me. I am Melissa, a licensed mental
Wow, thank
I
you.
am Melissa, a licensed mental health
5
therapist.
people clicked off.
Everybody's got, or more people are on because they want to see your aggression. And with me is my co-host, obviously Courtney, who is also a therapist, just maybe not today.
Yes. No, I am not a therapist today. Anybody I'm seeing today is fucked because it's
Maybe
not
you're gonna
happening.
give the best
No, I'm
therapy of your life and change people's lives.
playing. So today's episode is all about what are we talking about? We are talking about attachment styles. Um, this is kind of like a play on the last episode that we did actually. If you haven't listened to it yet, it's about monkey branching and this idea of how people have a tendency to get into other relationships before ending the ones that they're in as a false sense of safety and security for them, amongst other things. So this is actually a little bit of a part two to that, so to speak, where we are talking about like those most common and exhausting relationship dynamics that we have a tendency to see a lot in therapy. And that's usually the anxious attachment styles, the avoidant attachment styles, and why these people have a tendency to always find each other. I don't know, Melissa, if you feel that way, but I definitely see it come up a lot in my couple sessions is you have the anxious type with the avoidant type have a tendency to be in this relationship together. Do you see that?
I do. I mean, but also I see a little bit of everything because I have like 36 clients a week. But yeah, I do. It's not really that it's common, more so that I can't stop working. I love it here. So
She doesn't stop working. She
yeah,
really
it's fun.
doesn't.
It's a good time. Okay. So yeah, I mean, it's a thing. I don't know about the dynamics there, right? It's always good when somebody that's like it tends to be like anxiously attached is with somebody that it provides safety, security, and that's not to say that like those relationships don't provide that, but the dynamics are interesting, right? Like, I mean, if you're avoidant with somebody who tends to be anxious, it's gonna bring up a little bit more of that anxiety. And what I've seen is that you kind of get stuck in a cycle. I don't know if this is what you've seen from your clients, where one person gets like really anxious, and so the other person responds by getting more avoidant instead of like, providing maybe some validation or reassurance. They just like feel more pushed away. And then they end up like in that cycle of like, oh my God, how do we get out of this? Because now one person is annoyed and the other person feels like that one person doesn't care. I don't know if that's what you've seen. That's just like how I've seen it come up.
Oh no, yeah, like a thousand percent. Like it absolutely exacerbates those issues that those people are already having and how they're reacting to it. I just find it so interesting of why do, and part of why I wanted to talk about this is why do we end up with this type of person like in a or why do we keep on seeing that we're going more or less for like the same type of people over and over, and that's a little bit of what I wanted to talk about, but mainly through the lens of the anxious and avoidant sort of dynamic, so to speak, because I don't definitely think that it happens by accident, but almost kind of like something that you are familiar with, that you have seen, even if you know that it's not good for you, even if you know that it may have a tendency to not necessarily end well. I think it's very much of what we become familiar with, which in turn can kind of like translate in our mind of a sense of safety, because familiarity can bring that sense of safety because you know what to expect from it, even if it's not that great in comparison to the unknown, right? So I feel like anxious people have that tendency to seek people like that they can feel close and safe with, but then avoidant of the avoidant attached people tends to seek that distance in order to feel safe. But then it's like these systems lock in with one another, and it's like one reaches out, the other retreats. They're both feeling activated in those moments, and then like that activation, I think in some way gets mistaken for like this sense of like intense chemistry with one another. What do you think about
Intense
that?
chemistry. I find that funny because
Yes.
you hear people say that all the time where they'll say like, "Oh, this is like toxic, but there's nothing like toxic love." And you're just like, "Nah, girl. I mean, I get it. It's like that intensity, but
Yes,
we shouldn't be
yes.
looking for toxic for that intensity." But you hear it a lot, right? Like, "Oh, it's boring, it's safe, it's not intense." I find that very interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's a thing. I don't know why it results in like the intensity. Maybe it's something as far as like where my head goes is kind of like why people say being unfaithful, you get like that thrill from it. And what I mean by that is like you are now hiding, sneaking, you have like this like secret with somebody that feels like intimate and secure. And so sometimes when we think, oh, that's not gonna, like, bring us closer together. It's almost like a trauma bonding type of thing, and that's where my head is going, which may be why the intensity is there. Like, when something feels safe and secure, we don't tend to, like, associate intense feelings with it, but when something feels like anxiety provoking, it has, like, more intensity, and anger tends to be more intense, and, like, everything tends to be more intense. So maybe that's what it is, but that's kind we wows. We're wild out here. We got figured out. We're not
No, yeah, like I definitely think that it's that ability to have like these what we are saying are like these really intense relationships and then construing that for like then this really intense sense of intimacy or chemistry between two people, right? Like cuz again, I have absolutely also heard it so much of like the chemistry is so insane or the relationship is so intense. It can be so toxic, but it's just like the chemistry between us is so it is like so much, right? But it's that ability to misconstrue the idea of of the intensity of this sort of like back and forth activation that you're getting from engaging with one another and misconstruing that for intimacy, right? Because it's like you have the anxious avoidant chemistry is being driven by this sense of uncertainty and also not necessarily safety. So it's like the anxious partner feels alive when they get closeness as a result, and then it's like the avoidant partner feels relief when they get space, and it's like it becomes like this whole cycle of toxicity, really, in so many ways, and then it's like you're either deprived and then rewarded or whatever, and it's like it becomes, I think, for a lot of people, very addictive, and it's like it becomes something that, because again, you're creating the cycle, it becomes something that you over and over become now familiar with and like you're riding this high of what happens when you are feeling activated even if like you're fighting this is toxic whatever it's like you're riding this high that you are then eventually being rewarded for like through the closeness or the avoidant or whatever it is and it's just like goes on and on and on over and over again. Did that make sense or was just that like a bunch of
I
word
mean, it was a
vomit?
little bit of word vomit, but it made sense. It was, like, organized word vomit, but yeah, I think we're that's it's really what it is.
It's a type of
Yeah, the
day.
time of day. I also saw something since we kinda tie or we've had some podcasts, like, speaking about, like, social media. Um, I saw something on it, and I don't know, like, the validity to it or anything, but it was, interesting in that, they were saying our brains kinda, like, work and wanting to complete the story. So what it was saying is that, for some people, the story just doesn't feel like it's, like, completed, right? So if you're in a relationship that's, like, toxic and, like, just constantly ends, like, our brain almost tells us, like, "Hey, your story with this person isn't done." And so that's why we keep, like, seeking them out, which I think that there's some, like, truth to that because when you think of it, part of the reason that it's so hard to let go is that we envision our whole lives with somebody. So we see, like, the white picket fence and, like, whatever it is that you want your future to look like, and so it's hard to shift from, "Man, I saw myself spending my whole life with this person," to, well, now I'm just not ever gonna talk to this person. And so in that shift, I can definitely see how in our minds it can feel like the story isn't complete, which is very interesting. Um, But that can be something to it also because I mean, I don't know, like, we always hold on to, like, hope. So, especially in these toxic relationships, where, like, you're like, "Oh my god, what if they change? What if it's different? What if" all these different what ifs. It's like, I mean, yeah, like, what if? But are they doing anything to change it? Um, and if they're not, then how are they gonna change? So I think that that's also, like, a part of it too. I don't know how you feel about that though, but I found that to be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was talking to a client about that, I think just yesterday of I was asking her like what was she holding on to in this relationship that she was in or why did she choose to continue to move forward with it? And part of her answer was exactly that, that this sense of hope that things would eventually change. That the things that she had been asking for, requesting would eventually be received and taken into consideration and actually done and things would be different. And I'm like, okay, like I can understand that because all of us in a in a lot of ways hold on to hope with certain things or hold on to the sense of hope that even if we can't see things tangibly in our faces currently as working on the way that we want it to, that there might be that eventuality that things will change for the better and work out in our favor. And maybe there is in some respect that things have played out exactly like that before in the past, but I also think that what because we've been talking about cycles here in a way that when you are seeing this sort of like same dynamic happening over and over again, it does kind of come into question of when then does it become enough? When then do we draw the line of saying, okay, we're in this constant push pull sort of dynamic that has become so familiar to us. And when do we then decide that we're done with this? Like, when do we decide that, okay, nothing has been changing? We're in this for a certain period of time, and there are no signs to show that there is any sort of potential for change. When then do we draw the line and be like, okay, I need to actively work on breaking the cycle or doing things different. And that's an uncomfortable thing to try and come to terms with because, we are so drawn to what we know how to do to survive. We are so drawn in a way to comfort, what our sense of comfort and safety and stability looks like, and usually that's with something that is familiar to us, even if we know that it doesn't coincide with the actual meaning of safety. But familiarity can feel like safety for us in a lot of ways. So it's so hard to then at times even contemplate breaking that cycle or doing things different when you've been so locked in and so familiar and used to this cycle of things that it's like even when you're at that point that you know that it's not enough, it's like that hope still kind of like draws you to that over and over, right? I mean,
Yeah,
what do
I
you
mean,
think?
for sure, there's this thing, I don't remember if I've said it in podcast, but, I was listening to something, and it's something that, I heard, like, another therapist use, and I thought it was so interesting. It's, we prefer a familiar hell to an unfamiliar heaven when it comes to our central nervous system. And there's a lot to that,
True.
right? Like, there's a reason that when we tend to be anxious, we'll rewatch the same shows over and over, right? Because we, even if, honestly, even if we're like, hopefully it's not a show you hate and you're not like torturing yourself, but it's like we prefer familiarity, even if it comes with like a bunch of other things. So, like, for example, you hear people say when they're talking about breakups a lot, like, "Oh, if you just break up with that person, like, it's gonna hurt for a little bit versus, like, staying with that person, it's gonna hurt for a really long time." And people still choose to stay, right? Because it's, like, familiar to stay versus, like, the the pain of, like, not staying. Like, what would that look like? What does it look like to not stay? Like, what are you gonna feel like? What's gonna come up for you? Um, so yeah, I think a lot of times, like, we talk ourselves into staying in a difficult situation out of just fear, which is why I say this a lot in my sessions, and I don't know, lately I've been thinking about what are some of the things that I say to people that might be, like, upsetting, because I feel like I'm very much, like I'm very much, like, to the point with a lot of things, um and yeah, I don't know, I tell people, like, it's okay to just, like, sit in those feelings and to just feel, right? Um, like, I think a lot of what is hard for us as people is when we try to, like, avoid anxiety, avoid the fear of being alone, avoid feeling loneliness, like, dude, those are all parts of life, right? Like, if you're avoiding all those things, like, I mean, I don't know. Like, you're just living in fear and, like, stopping yourself from doing certain things that might be good for you, like leaving an unhealthy relationship, out of fear of what that might feel like. And that just seems wild when you think about it, but it's a thing, right? So, I mean, I don't know. You were just talking about how that comes up. I don't know if you've had, like, any situations like that, Courtney, even in your personal life where you're like, "Man, I don't wanna deal with this. Like, I'd rather just sit in this craziness for a little bit and find a solution to it." But, like, that's what comes up for us.
Yeah, I mean, I've absolutely been in toxic relationships before, like really toxic relationships, and I can definitely reflect on that now and see how that sort of cycle developed in them, and what I could have done differently, and all that stuff. Yeah, for sure, right? But I also think in part, and I do talk about this quite a bit in a lot of my sessions and podcasts and things like that, is that these are things that we have a tendency, not always, I'm not going to say like this is a blanket sort of statement, but we have a tendency to be very familiar with these things in our early development. I mean, that just kind of like is what it is. Like I tell people this all the time, is that like what the dynamic that you are born into is your foundation in a lot of ways, right? Like that it's from the people that are around you in your early lives, as growing up as a child, that teach you how to talk, how to walk, what like things to eat, how what anger looks like, what happiness, sadness, relationships look like. And I think in a lot of ways that's very much in part of what we see here. Again, not in every sort of situation. Sometimes it just simply comes from the relationships that we get involved in, that our first sort of relationship, so to speak, romantic relationships that can create that sort of development. But it's like you see it a lot in that sense of anxious sort of attachment, often grew up with this sense of like inconsistent availability. And then like the avoidant attachment often grew up with this sense of like an emotional overwhelm, or just simply being dismissed. And a lot of times when I am navigating relationships, both in like individual therapy and couples, and we're talking about what did some of their early relationships look like, it's usually exactly that. It's that sense of you're seeing that same comparison, that same familiarity that they're bringing into their own relationships, or that they're feeling activated by in their own relationships, because they've seen it themselves in their early development. So sorry guys, I'm sick over here, but I think in a lot of ways it's that early sort of environment that it feels familiar, even if it's painful, and it's like it's what we have that tendency to attach to because it's so familiar. Now, again, familiarity doesn't mean safe, but I think for us in a lot of ways it
Yeah,
does.
absolutely. I
So,
actually find that so interesting because, again, I don't speak in general terms. Maybe, if you're listening to this podcast, you're like, this isn't my situation. But whenever I have a client that's developing like pure, like an anxious attachment, there's always a fear of abandonment. There's always intense emotional shifts. There's
mhm.
always heightened sensitivity to their partner's emotional shifts and needs, and it's just always there, right? And again, this isn't a general thing. This is just me speaking about like the my experiences with it. And whenever I point it out and I'm like, "Hey, tell me about your childhood. What's up?" It always stems from freaking childhood. I think there was like like maybe like one or two people that were
Yep.
like, "Oh, it wasn't my childhood, but it was like a past relationship that like made all that come up." But that
Yep.
honestly isn't even,
Mhm.
yeah, it's mostly like inconsistent parenting, whether it's like, oh, mom wasn't around, dad wasn't around, grew up with my grandparents, unstable family dynamics and relationships with just different people in their lives growing up, feeling that they were constantly judged, whatever. All of those things come up. And it's like, man, how is that, like, so common, and how crazy is it? It always blows my mind, right? Like, how crazy is it that our childhood can impact how we form relationships? Like, your mom may be deciding, Imma pick them up sometimes when they cry and the other times I'm not, has really dictated how anxious you are. Like, how unfair is that? I think about that and I'm like, "Man, oh my god. Why is that a thing?" Um, and I don't know if other people feel the same way too.
For
It
sure.
seems unfair. It seems like, man, it's, no matter how hard we try, like, we're all dealt. I guess it's, like, also, like, how, what we're born into, socioeconomic status, like, we're just all dealt a different card in life, and our parents really can make or break how we process things, and I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, and I was actually talking to a client about this just the other day. It was mainly through the lens of this dynamic that has developed with her co-parenting with the father and like how that's been impacting the children because it's exactly this, right? This idea of like your children, no matter how young they are, they're understanding relationships and emotions and all these things through the lens of what they see from the people that they interact with the most in their life, right? And that's usually the people that are raising them. So, and she happens to listen to this podcast too, so she's gonna know exactly what I'm talking about. But I say this to say that it isn't so important for us to realize that, like, yes, there are going to be a lot of things that are out of our control when it comes to obviously how other people choose to engage. And maybe it would be a good idea for us to do like another podcast about this, especially like co parenting and things like that. But the most that you can really do, and this is actually what I said to her the other day, is like you have control over how you show your children what relationships looks like through you, right? What that healthy sort of dynamic looks like with how you engage with them, how you give them that ability to express themselves and how you express yourselves with them and the consistency and stability that you provide them, right? Like you can only you have control over that of what you show them, that. And even though they're super young, it's through that consistency and that stability that they learn from you, right? Even if the other half, the other half of the co-parenting style is inconsistent and there are things there, yes, that might impact it, but they have that stability with you. And through your ability to like guide them, teach them and all these things with how you are simply acting as yourself in this can go a long way to helping to mitigate some of these things that we're seeing here, which is people having that sense of feeling a sense of instability in their lives, especially as an early age. So that's one thing that I can say to anybody that is listening out there is, especially, parents that are raising young children, is like try to do your best at just creating that sense of listening to your kids even when they're acting out, creating as much a much sense of security and stability through how you engage with them and so forth. But again, I think it would be a great episode to get into another time. But to kind of go back into here and through the lens of why these things are coming up here. I think we talked a lot about that, but also what do you think about how we break the cycle of that? Of not trying to keep on going to the same partner or acting the same way and like trying to find, some a different partner, a different sort of healthy dynamic. How do you normally address that with your clients?
Well, for me, I first try to have them understand where it comes from because I think it's, again, not a general thing. Maybe some people disagree, but I think it's really eye-opening and almost like empowering to see, man, this is actually not how I'm feeling towards this person. This is like coming from my past, meaning when we're children and we develop that anxious attachment style, that's because we depend on our caregivers and our parents for safety. So if our parents don't show up, literally, we die. right? That just is what it is, right? Like we need our people there to take care of us. We need somebody to feed us. We need somebody to change us. We need somebody to make sure that we're safe. Um, we don't need that as adults. And so I think a lot of that anxious attachment style is from feeling that we need that person. And again, nothing is general. I have heard of some people say, maybe this isn't even from my past. This is just this person made me feel like I needed them. It's enough to develop an attachment style. So I start there by like helping them understand, hey, where is this coming from? Because currently, as an adult, you don't really need somebody. And I say that loosely because some people will sit there and say, well, no, I need them financially, right? Like maybe you're in a situation where like you need somebody financially and without them, like you're going to be in a really tough spot. That's fair. That's a different conversation. But when we're talking about needs, for the most part, we can feed ourselves, we can take care of ourselves. We no longer need a caregiver. We just want somebody in our lives. So, very different conversation. So that's how I start. And then I kinda shifted to, all right, like, walk me through, like, even, like, the worst case scenarios, right? Like, what does it look like if you don't have that person? What has it looked like in the past? Like, when did this start to come up? So really, I start with, like, let's gain some insight into why, like, this is even a thing for you, and then let's figure out a way to help you build that confidence and that independence to, like, know that, "Hey, look, listen, like, you don't need anybody," right? And, like, actually really make you believe that. Um, so I don't know how you approach it, corny, but that tends to work out just okay.
Yeah, I would say it is definitely somewhat similar, and this is kind of where, again, this is a little bit of a different topic, but maybe for a different episode, but we're as therapists, a lot of us can be taught like the same things, but it's also through our experience, through our personalities, through maybe the different specialties that we engage into that we also kind of bring in like our own things into it as well. So the foundation, I feel like I do the same thing as Melissa does, but I also do like through my own, specialties that I find that I really like. I incorporate my own things as well. So it's definitely that sense of for building that sense of awareness of like what's happening, the cycles, what we're engaging in, separating that sense of like what this intense sort of connection looks like with safety, so to speak, and having that insight first and foremost with what why this feels familiar and all that stuff. Yes. From there, when I look at it through the lens of how do we then work on actively breaking that cycle and you learning to rely on yourself and self-soothe on well, when you learn to rely on yourself, like it kind of depends on like where that person is coming from. If there's a lot of low self-esteem, if there is that sense of dependency or lack of confidence when it comes to themselves, and I'm doing sometimes a lot of somatic work. Like I like to incorporate a lot of somatic movement at times in the type of therapy that I do. And it's a lot of understanding the sensations that are coming up in our body, especially when we are feeling that sort of like anxious or avoidant sort of tendencies. And then learning in those moments on not only how to self-soothe and regulate, but also just understanding more of like what is coming up in those moments. And then through that, it's kind of then developing their capacity to see and build confidence in how they are able to manage on their own outside of any other sort of relationship or dynamic or cycle. And I have found that for me, not only do I love doing that, but I have found for a lot of clients that do engage in that to be really effective in kind of securing their own sense of connection with themselves. And yeah, so that's a lot of like what I do on my end. And it's different for every client because I don't do somatic work with everyone, but for others it's maybe aspects of like CBT, maybe it's aspects of trauma therapy that trauma integration that we're doing. So it really just depends. Sometimes I'm doing a lot of like timeline work or like understanding we're working through like different patterns of a relationship so that they can see a lot of like what's coming up for them consistently throughout the year. So it's a combination of a lot of things that I like to implement. But I think overall, what we're both trying to, I think what's similar in both of this is kind of creating that sense of insight, and then that sense of security within themselves in a lot of ways. And I think that's what a lot of therapists ultimately are trying to do with you, just in their own kind of way.
Yeah, definitely.
So, anything else that you feel like is important to add to this conversation,
Well, you
Melissa?
mentioned something that was really important, and you said self-esteem, and that's also that's a pattern that I've seen. Normally, again, not always, guys, don't bite my head off, but normally there is something to low self-esteem when you have an anxious attachment style. Because no matter how you spin it, if you're feeling like you need somebody,
Mm-hmm.
you're putting yourself down along the way, right? Like, why would you feel that you need somebody? Well, I can. I can't do it. I'm not enough. I didn't set this up. I should have thought about this. Whatever it is, right? Like all of that tends to come up for us. So it's really important to think about how self-esteem plays a role there for us. 'Cause it does, right? So, I don't know, I think that's just an important thought to keep in mind where if you do have an anxious attachment style, think about how you see yourself, how you view your ability to be independent, how, if like even if you're in a unhealthy relationship where there is verbal abuse, like do you really believe that you need that person? Like, is that like a thing that comes up for you? Right. So I don't know, because if you're sitting there, you can do all the work in the world in therapy. But if you're sitting there saying, it doesn't matter, like, I can't leave, like, I just can't, it's not going to be good for me. I'm better off here than somewhere else. Then I could tell you all sorts of things. You're gonna sit there and get upset with me because in your head, you're like, "It doesn't even matter, like, I can't, like, I can't leave, this is what it is." So that's, I think, a really important thing to consider while you're breaking it down, is really gaining insight into ourselves and, like, if we do feel like we need somebody, why? Like, where is that coming from? Why do you need that person? Because like I said, sometimes it's financial and sometimes there's things that we actually have to, like, set separate goals for and work on because it's, like, real, right? Like, building either work or, like, if you decided not to work to be, like, a stay-at-home whatever, like, all those things are gonna impact your ability to leave versus the things that are just emotional and versus the things that, like, maybe aren't based on facts.
So I guess to kind of wrap this up, if you find yourself that you keep on ending up in these sort of like anxious, avoided dynamics in your relationships, please understand you are not in any way broken. I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say that there's something so wrong with you, right? It's more so that you're possibly in this trap of choosing things that you know that you are familiar with. And it's really just about understanding that it's as simple as just trying to teach you something new. Oh, I say it's simple, but not really simple, right? But it's understanding that familiarity does not mean safe, and that safety doesn't always necessarily mean things are dull and boring, right? So, if this episode resonated with you in any way, please share it with somebody who keeps on like saying like, why am I always attracting this type of person? And please follow us on our Collectively Unhinged Therapy Talk podcast. Also on our social medias, Strong Mind MH. We are on TikTok, we are on Facebook, we are on Instagram. And as always, if you guys have any ideas for episodes, please let us know. We would love to hear from you guys. But until next time, stay safe and stay a little unhinged. Bye.
Bye.